So what should migrants, employers and families do before their status is challenged? I want to talk about that with Roxanna Naidoo, who's Director of Global Strategy at the advisory firm Latita Africa. Welcome back to the program, and as I understand it, your central argument is that legal does not always mean safe. What do you mean by that?
Thank you so much for having me, Jeremy. And yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I've had an influx of clients, I think, for the past few weeks now, where, yes, they already have their paperwork, or they are foreign nationals that are waiting with pending applications, and they are in South Africa legally. The problem right now is that having that defensible paper trail isn't that easily accessible for many people. Either they don't have the proper documentation because it's pending right now, or they've lost documentation or don't know where they can find that. And when we are at a stage where we are right now in South Africa, where this is being questioned to every single foreign national, you need to make sure that you have that defensible paper trail to prove that, whether you're stopped by law enforcement or whether you are questioned by an employer.
And of great concern that if someone has a valid visa, they still feel exposed in the current climate. And I would imagine that fear or concern exacerbated by the protests that we have seen this past week.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are concerned that if they're not able to produce valid paperwork, what are the consequences for that? And right now, I'm trying to get the immigrants that I'm working with in a space where they're able to verify their status. So if your application is pending, you should be able to show proof of that process immediately. It's not something where you can say, oh, hold on, let me go and find it. That means having copies of your previous or your current visas. It means you need to have the renewal, or if you're appealing the process, you need to have proof of that, or even your VFS receipts and any type of acknowledgement from Home Affairs. It's not enough to just say, I have my papers. That proof needs to exist.
And I think the key word there, which is worth exploring, might be pending. Is a pending visa, a waiver or an appeal application enough protection in this current climate? Or do you think, Roxanne, people can still get into trouble?
So that's the thing, Jeremy. In practice, many foreign nationals, they're not ignoring the law. They've submitted the applications, they've followed the process, and they're still waiting for a decision. So the challenge is that delay creates a gray area in daily life for a foreign national. So a person may have done the right thing, but they are now still struggling with an employer, with a bank or a landlord or a school, or even some official that has asked questions just because they can't immediately prove where they stand and what their status is. So that's why I always distinguish between the status and then the evidence that can actually prove that.
And it's immediate proof, which I think is critical. You also suggest that a person's story matters less than their documents, right?
Absolutely. For a foreign national, that would usually include, again, it's going to be your valid passport, your current visa or permit, your proof of any renewal, travel documents that you have. It's a file. It's a file that you need to have with all of that paperwork that tells the story, not simply being able to vocalize that, but evidence with the dates, with the stamps that can be handed over to an official or anyone that would request that from you.
You also warn that a visa solution is not always a tax solution. How can someone be lawful then with Home Affairs, but also be exposed to the South African Revenue Service?
Okay, so what the foreign national living in South Africa needs to remember is that SARS confirms that South Africa uses a residence-based tax system. So that means that residents are generally taxed on their worldwide income, but non-residents are taxed on their South African sourced income, so income earned in South Africa. So that means now that your remote workers, executives, consultants, business owners that are now working in South Africa, that are foreign nationals, they should not assume that that visa solution is the same as the tax solution. Just because they have a visa in South Africa, it does not negate the tax obligations that they have. They also need to look at the double taxation agreements between South Africa and their country, their country of origin, to see where those tax implications lie.
I just want to ask you two quick questions about risk, if I can. The first is, what could happen to a company if it gets the workers' visa conditions, payroll treatment, or the right to work status wrong? There's obviously a penalty here.
So yes, there are legal exposures that can be quite serious. Under the Immigration Act specifically, employers may not employ an illegal foreigner or a foreigner whose status does not authorize employment by that employer, or a person who is working outside the terms of that status. So the risk is evidentiary. If an illegal foreigner is found on a business premises, there can be a presumption that the person was employed by the person in control of that premises, unless there's evidence to the contrary. So the issue is not only the employee's immigration status, it's also whether the employer can prove that it took reasonable steps as well.
And finally, Roxanne, with community groups and neighbours sometimes demanding documents, as has been evidenced this week, is there a legal line between public concern and intimidation?
Absolutely. And I think it's necessary to understand that public anger doesn't create legal authority in any way. You have private individuals, landlords, neighbors, community groups, informal movements. They do not become immigration officials, and you do not owe them any type of paperwork unless lawfully required. Police and authorized officials may have powers in proper circumstances, but unauthorized demands, threats for document seizures, those types of things, it's not necessary for immigration enforcement. You need proper legal and safety mechanisms for this. So foreign nationals should avoid treating, these types of arguments, these social arguments. They need to keep their original documents safe. Don't just hand it out to anyone, and use certified or digital copies of documents where appropriate. You don't want to be handing over to the wrong person.
Roxanna Naidoo, Director of Global Strategy at the advisory firm Latita Africa, thank you very much. And that is our program for today. You've been listening to Moneyweb at Midday, and we're here every weekday at noon with the latest in current affairs, the economy and policy. You can always catch the podcast version a little later. Thank you for making us part of your day. Until next time, goodbye.